As we turn our attention to the season of giving and the upcoming winter holidays, we think about the many New Yorkers across the city who are struggling to meet their basic needs. Having enough food to eat is a critical building block to stability, and it's important as poverty fighters that we always have a full and accurate understanding of the experience of food hardship citywide. Here's where research comes into play. Each year, we partner with Columbia University's Center on Poverty and Social Policy to produce a food insecurity report. It gives us a current snapshot of the experience of food hardship, and this data complements our grant making to direct service emergency food partners and also bolsters our policy advocacy to expand access to critical resources and benefits for nutrition and financial well-being. I'm Crystal Cooper, Deputy Director of Communications here at Robin Hood. On today's podcast, we welcome Chris Yera, a researcher at Columbia University who produced the 2023 Poverty Tracker Spotlight on food hardship. We'll also speak to returning guest Chymeka Olfonse, Managing Director of Robin Hood's Adult and Household Supports portfolio, which oversees grant making that fights food insecurity. Chris and Chymeka, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Crystal. Great to be back.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Crystal. I'm glad to be here.
So first, Chris, could you give our listeners a brief overview of the Poverty Tracker itself? What is it? What makes it unique? And give us some information about the Food Poverty Tracker project in particular.
Yeah, of course. So the Poverty Tracker is this innovative study that we've been doing with Robin Hood for the past 10 plus years. And it surveys a representative sample of New Yorkers around every 3 to 4 months to explore how New Yorkers experience poverty and other disadvantages over time. And the great thing about this approach that makes it unique is that instead of just providing snapshots of people's lives every year, the study allows us to also follow along New Yorkers' lives and see how their economic standing and well-being changes throughout the years. So in recent years, we've been using the Poverty Tracker every Thanksgiving to spotlight New Yorkers' experiences of food hardship across the city. And we try to do this from different angles every year. So in the past, for example, we've done food reports that map the rates of food hardship across each borough. And just last year, we had one that examined the usage of food pantries among immigrants in the city.
Thank you, Chris. Can you tell us a bit about this year's Food Poverty Tracker report? What did you seek to measure or find out?
So this year, in addition to looking at food hardship rates across the city, as we do every year, we focused on looking at the extent to which New Yorkers struggling to afford food also struggled with financial and material hardships, like having their utilities shut off or having to stay in a shelter, as well as what health problems and mental health issues coincided with their struggles to afford food.
We're excited for our listeners to hear from Chymeka a bit later because she focuses on grant making that integrates the experience of food insecurity with other supports that adults need to achieve stability. So you mentioned that last year's report was focused on food pantry use, and this year's is sort of about the compounding struggles that relate to food insecurity. Looking at this year's report compared to last year's or even previous years, are there any trends of note that our listeners should know about?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, every year we kind of try to come at this topic of food hardship from different perspectives. But the one key trend that we always try to look back on is how food hardship rates in the city change every year. And this year we looked at the rate of food hardship in 2022, since it was the latest data available. And we found that over a third of adults and almost half of families with children in New York City struggled with food hardship in 2022. And we found that these were substantial increases from the year before. And these numbers include people who would experience what we call severe food hardship, or those who often run out of food or worried that they do so before having money to buy more. And those who experience what we call moderate food hardship, which refers to those who sometimes experience these challenges in affording food. But unfortunately, we didn't find these increases to be very surprising. We knew that food hardship rates had greatly decreased in 2021 because there were a lot of government supports and policies in place that year, like the expanded child tax credit and stimulus checks, for example, which helped families struggling during the pandemic stay afloat. And that being said, most of these policies were only temporary and expired at the end of the year. So we returned to this sort of business as usual reality in 2022. As a result, we expected that the lack of these temporary lifelines would end up increasing rates of not just food hardship, but also rates of poverty and other disadvantages in the city.
I guess it would be fair to say that food hardship is pervasive and it's also expanding. Can you walk us through some of the key findings from this year's Poverty Tracker report? What does the top line data say?
Good thing, Crystal. So in this year's Poverty Tracker report on food hardship, we have two central findings. So first, we find that food hardship is hardly ever experienced in isolation, we found that an overwhelming majority of New Yorkers experiencing severe food hardship, or over 80%, also experienced at least one other material hardship. And among these individuals, almost 40% had their utilities shut off at some point during the year, and almost a fifth had to stay in a shelter because they couldn't afford their housing. And second, we also found that food hardship can both result from and worsen health-related challenges. We found that 80% of New Yorkers experiencing severe food hardship also reported that they were experiencing challenges related to their health and well-being. And it's notable that about half of these individuals struggled with poor health, and over 2 in 5 of these individuals struggled with what we call serious psychological distress, which includes feelings of anxiety and depression, among other things. But despite how unsettling these findings can be, I think they really help emphasize the fact that long-term policy reforms can really help alleviate these problems, which could include more robust food assistance programs and cash-based assistance programs, among other things, that help people not just afford food, but also be able to manage all the other things that pile up alongside their struggle with food hardship.
That is not surprising, Chris, but really glad that you were able to walk us through the coincidence of food hardship with other experiences of struggle and just giving us a very visual sense of what that is. I want to turn things over to Chymeka. So these are really incredible findings and provide a lot of insight for us as we do this grant making. How do the findings of this report help you think about your investments in the upcoming year, considering that you focus on all of the supports that adults need to achieve stability, jobs, housing, and food?
Thanks, Crystal. The Poverty Tracker confirms what we've been hearing from our community partners. Food and material hardship is pervasive and expanding. Continuing to fund our partners offering emergency food as well as benefits enrollment support is really critical. It's really in an effort to help New Yorkers get on their feet and achieve stability. I think most importantly, that we need to continue to invest in the creation of good jobs that offer advancement, benefits, and family-sustaining wages so adults and families can weather economic shocks like an unexpected car bill or a medical expense without actually falling into poverty. So without falling into poverty, we know that the tracker shows us that folks have their mental state and satisfaction with life also impacted. So again, it's adults being affected on so many different levels, and it's important to create that stability, and a great job is a wonderful way to start. And on the housing side, there's so much there to unpack, but I will say like having affordable housing is really important, and having access to that so that way when if there are any increases in rent, it doesn't break you and it doesn't force you into homelessness.
So Chymeka, how do we move beyond just emergency food distribution for people who need to eat right now and are going to a food bank or maybe to get the ingredients for their next meal? What investments or solutions can help the most vulnerable New Yorkers achieve stability?
So the data emphasizes that food hardship can be alleviated through policies, right, that really improve economic situations of individuals who are facing insecurity, instability. During the pandemic, we saw expanded unemployment benefits and stimulus checks really provide the flexible cash needed to help people make ends meet. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, is an effective way to do that. But again, the key thing is that you want individuals to have the flexible cash so they can actually pay for food and again, pay for life's expenses. There are federal and state level policies proposed to expand SNAP eligibility and benefits. The Improving Access to Nutrition Act at the federal level seeks to expand SNAP eligibility by eliminating certain work requirements. And at the state level, legislation like A6214 aims to create a state SNAP minimum benefit program to help eligible households afford food. So again, you can see that there are policy levers that can be pulled to make sure that folks can, again, avoid poverty or be able to move out of poverty because they will have the stability that is needed. And I'll go back to just ringing the bell on jobs. They need to have good jobs.
Chymeka, I know that we are discussing, Thanksgiving and the holiday has been raised a few times here, time to the release of this report. Going back to just the top line findings about food hardship, give us a sense of the scope of the emergency food work that Robin Hood funds, both currently and historically. We have to kind of mention who some of these critical partners are that are leading efforts on the ground to make sure New Yorkers' basic nutritional needs are met.
So as a part of our emergency food work, Robin Hood invests in partners and best-in-class organizations like City Harvest, like Food Bank, who have the ability to move large volumes of food to hundreds of local pantries and soup kitchens across the city. We also fund a handful of nonprofits that are located in high-need communities across the 5 boroughs. Some organizations include St. John's Bread and Life and the Campaign Against Hunger in Brooklyn. There's also Project Hospitality in Staten Island, Part of the Solution, or POTS, in the Bronx, River Fund in Queens, and West Side Campaign Against Hunger and New York Common Pantry, which are based in Manhattan. These groups distribute large volumes of food too, but they also provide wraparound services such as housing assistance, legal referrals, and supports with benefit enrollment. As guests are arriving to pantries, they are also being screened for assistance, such as SNAP. And again, that is significant because it's not just being able to feed your family and pick up that bag, but also maybe with your SNAP benefit, you could pay for food while you use your funds to actually cover rent, to cover medical expense. So it just allows individuals, again, to have some stability, which is really important. I should add that, with our Partners Collective Impact in 2022, emergency food groups distributed over 44 million pounds of food to 168,000 New Yorkers facing food insecurity. I'm sure that number will probably be much higher, just given what we know on the ground in 2023. Our funded partners also enrolled over 41,000 households in food and nutrition benefits. And I should add that in addition to our direct investments, Robin Hood also invests in improving the city's food ecosystem, which is extensive, but non-centralized as well. So there are approximately about 800 soup kitchens and pantries across the 5 boroughs. But given the high levels of food insecurity in the city, we recognize that it's important to not only, again, invest in organizations, but also the ecosystem so it can be efficient and effective. We can't fund every pantry, but we can influence how city dollars are actually allocated and to really make sure that it's accessible in the communities that need it most when it comes to food.
Thank you so much, Chymeka. I want to thank you both so much, Chris and Chymeka, for joining us today. We've learned how research, grant making, and policy go hand in hand and really got a sense of the current experience of food hardship alongside other hardships that New Yorkers are facing. Chris, as our special guest from Columbia today, I want to give you the last word. Research and reports of this kind feature so many data points, but what should the average New Yorker know about food hardship, or what would you want them to walk away with an understanding of?
Yeah, thank you, Crystal. I'm very glad for the opportunity to be here and speak on this issue. I'd want the average New Yorker to know that there's a lot else that goes into food hardship beyond just struggling with food. And that if you are struggling to afford food, you're not alone. Food hardship is not an unsolvable problem. I think based on policy reforms that we saw in the pandemic, like the expanded child tax credit and stimulus checks and expanded SNAP benefits, that there's a ton of options that policymakers have at their disposal that they can enact to alleviate these issues and help not just alleviate food hardship, but also alleviate all the issues that pile up with it and compound the issue.
That is so important because we know that together, food hardship and financial hardship really prevent folks from thriving and making that permanent journey out of poverty. I really want to thank you both for joining us. I'm Crystal Cooper. This has been another Robin Hood moment. For more stories of impact and information about our current projects, please visit us at robinhood.org.